Hey, welcome back to the Profit Builder Unscripted. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make requests of your team in a way that ensures that they're going to actually follow through on what you've asked them to do. So let's jump in. And in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about, I've actually been talking for the last few episodes about how do you build great teams who actually take ownership. And I've been sharing a story in my own journey as I've been making some changes in my business. And, I learned a few things this week that I just wanted to share with you, because I think that a lot of times we as leaders embark on making change in our business, and then we discover that things don't quite stick the way that we wanted to, or people do it for a little while and then all of a sudden things start falling apart, right? Like we say we want to change how something is, and everybody says yes, we're going to do it, and then if you're not managing it all the time, it's not happening, or it doesn't quite happen as you expected. And that's exactly what happened with me in the last couple of weeks with my team. And, I have a great team. So I really appreciate them and admire them and appreciate all that they do for me. And as I started to make some changes in what I was asking them to do, what I discovered is things sort of fell apart in the last few weeks, is that there were some things that, it's funny, I tell other people to do in their business, but I didn't actually do myself. That was one thing that I really learned. And the other thing that I was reminded of this week was sometimes when people appear to challenge us, or people appear to that there's some conflict, that we a lot of times take it personally, which is exactly what happened for me. And I found myself getting really irritated, and I was ready to start this conversation with somebody on my team that, like, sort of from this defensive space, until I asked some questions and I learned something different. And so let me just share a little bit more about both of those things. So first of all, one of the things that I did was that I asked my team to take on this project, and it's two people, Rebecca and Dorothy. I asked them to take on this project, and I told them that I wanted them to take ownership of it. We talked about what did that look like. I talked about how I wanted them to be more independent in the decisions that they were making, and kind of report to me about what their decisions were, but they didn't need to have me be in the middle of the mix of all these decisions, right? Like we've all, maybe you've been in that place too. And, I've been in this place in different times of my business where I go, you know what? I'm way too much in the middle of the weeds of all this. I need to trust my team more. I need to give it away a bit. But I also understand that I didn't want to abdicate, but I also knew that I didn't want to be in the middle of all these decisions. And I had been kind of treating them like helpers, which wasn't what I wanted. It's not the way I want to run my business. And I was not having fun, and it just wasn't working. So I decided to make this change. And initially it was all great. They all agreed. And then I realized a few weeks into it that things started to not happen consistently, or I wasn't clear about when things, and we share a Trello board, like there were a lot of things on it, but I just noticed I kept having to ask, well, what about this? And what about this? And have you considered this? And they had said that they had come up with this plan for how they were going to make this transition in this project that I was asking them to take on. And what I realized was that in a conversation I was having with both of them one day was that I had made this really big mistake, which was there was not one of the two of them that was going to own managing and running the project. And as soon as I realized it, I was like, oh, Rebecca thought Dorothy was doing this. Dorothy thought Rebecca was doing this. But the other thing that I noticed was that it didn't have somebody take full ownership and accountability to make sure that all the pieces were going to happen. And, it's so funny because one of the things I talk to people about a lot is how do you make smart agreements with people? What are smart agreements? And maybe you've heard that term. I use a little bit of a different definition for each of those, but smart agreements are that they're specific, they're measurable, there's clear accountability, they're realistic, and they're time driven. So the specific, I think we were pretty specific about what we wanted to do. Measurable, that was kind of missing. I didn't have like, okay, here's all the things we want to have on the Trello board and in the project. Clear accountability. So that was really the big piece that was missing, that there wasn't clear accountability about who was going to make sure all the next pieces happened. And realistic, it has to do with, are people making promises? Because people want to be yeses to us, right? Realistic, were we realistic about the time frame within which it was going to happen, and that it was time driven by a specific date? Well, we had the time driven part, but we also discovered some things about the time frame was not realistic when we discovered all the pieces and parts. And that happens sometimes, right? We discovered that there's more scope in terms of the specificity, or, what the details of all the steps were. But the piece that I discovered was I was missing who's going to be accountable. Like, even though they're both working on it, they're both important pieces of the team, that being really clear about who was going to own it, who was going to make sure that the updates were done, who was going to make sure that like the other people involved were going to do their part. And so it was great. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, I need to make a request with one person being the person who's going to take ownership. And as it turned out, I asked about Dortha to do that. It was clear she had more bandwidth, and that made sense. And so I did. Like, I said, hey, will you drive this process? Would you make sure that all the details of all the steps and everything, all the decisions that need to be made, and who needs to be involved, and give us deadline dates? Would you be the one to drive this project and make sure to bring it all the way home? And she agreed, and things started to move more smoothly. Right now, like that, what that did is I made a specific request. It was measurable. Like, I asked her to update the Trello board. She was clearly accountable. I asked her to give me a deadline date, and that it was time driven, right? So there was so that it wasn't me imposing a deadline, but that she was making a deadline that was realistic and that was time driven. So it was just like when I started to make that shift with her and with Rebecca, in terms of like getting that clarity about who was going to own it, all of a sudden my level of worry about it stopped. Dortha's clarity about, I've got to make sure to drive this and make sure that all these deadlines are met, got into place, right? So she took ownership of it. And it was a great reminder to me that sometimes we are so, we miss the pieces, right? We like, even me, that I talk about this all the time with people, that sometimes like in the breakdown, to notice and stop and go, okay, my first reaction was, I was a little frustrated. I was like, you gave me more tasks. Nobody really like planned out the whole plan. It made me realize that A, my communication wasn't specific and clear enough. B, I hadn't gotten somebody who was clearly accountable, right? And the time-driven thing, I think we had done a good job on, but I was missing some of those pieces. And so the next time you find yourself in a situation where you are struggling with getting people to follow through or do what they say they're going to do, you might remind yourself and ask yourself those questions. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is there a clear accountability? Like, somebody really owns making sure, even if there's more than one person involved, one person really owns that there's clear accountability. Is it realistic, right? Did I make an agreement, or did they make an agreement that was not really able to be delivered? And is it time driven? Like, that time driven thing, make sure that we can manage it with our team, but they can also self-manage what they're doing. So super important. It was great. we were able to talk through the breakdown, and things are running more smoothly. So that was my learning from the last couple of weeks about this project. In the next session, I'm actually going to talk about the other breakdown that happened, which was with somebody else on my team, with Rebecca. My assumption about what was going on with her, and seeing that, it really was something completely different. And I just needed to stop and really listen. And have what was initially a hard conversation, but I'll share that in the next episode. I'm going to leave you with two things before we finish. One of them is a quote from Jim Collins, and I love this quote. He says, "The moment you feel you need to tightly manage someone, you've made a hiring mistake. The best people don't need to be managed, guided and taught and led, yes, but tightly managed, no." So that's by Jim Collins, who's the author of Good to Great. Awesome book. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to do so. If you found today's content valuable, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and make sure to check out the resources below of other things that I offer that can help you in growing, thriving, and prospering in your business and your life. And I look forward to seeing you next time on the Profit Builder Unscripted.